Welcome back to Yang Daily. I'll be your host, Alex Cheney, bringing you all the Yang news you need to live your life right. Strap in, because we've got a long one today. A couple of big items didn't make it into this episode, but I will get them into the next one. Quick shout out to our Tier 3 patrons, Peter Park, Shay Meehan, and Nathan Stankowski, as well as all our other patrons. You keep us all informed and engaged. If any of you out there want to join these advocates of humanity first and independent journalism, head on over to patreon.com/YangDaily. It would only take a couple of bucks a month from each listener to keep this podcast and community going and growing into the future. Now on to the news. Starting off positive, reports are that over half of the $1,400 relief checks have already been delivered, marking an incredible increase in efficiency over previous efforts. We should really send one out every month so we can dial this in even tighter. Am I right? You may recall that the Biden administration promised to facilitate 100 million vaccine shots within Biden's first 100 days of office. Well, I'm very happy to say that they have met that goal far ahead of schedule. The goal was reached today, just 58 days into Biden's term. A stark contrast from the massive overpromising and underdelivering that led to missing goals by orders of magnitude under Trump. The general consensus among the medical community appears to be that the vaccine rollout is now proceeding to pace. The CDC's vaccine tracker shows about 41 million fully vaccinated and more than 75 million with at least one vaccine dose, adding about 2.2 million per day. I can also say that most of my own family have been vaccinated. Biden has recently said they secured an additional 100 million doses and claims there will be enough for everyone to be eligible by May. This is very good news. Speaking of COVID, a new study on immunity and reinfection rates has been released from Denmark of a shockingly large sample of 4 million PCR-tested individuals. The researchers estimate natural immunity to COVID from previous COVID infection to be approximately 80% in people under 65 years old and just 47% in those over 65. As such, they highly recommend vaccination for the elderly, which provides over 90% protection to everyone, even if they have previously contracted COVID. There's also the added danger of different variants of the virus, as Dr. Fauci tried to explain to Rand Paul recently, which could reduce immunity even further. Paul was arguing people should not have to wear a mask after getting vaccinated, while Fauci was arguing that it's still beneficial. I get Paul's argument that telling people they don't have to mask once vaccinated could help incentivize more people to get the vaccine. However, I would make 3 points. 1. It is still possible to spread the virus after being vaccinated. 2. Every person wearing a mask helps to encourage others who may not be vaccinated to do so. 3. Saying that the vaccinated do not have to wear a mask would either result in everyone who puts their personal comfort over lives falsely claiming that they've been vaccinated, or it would require the enforcement of some sort of vaccine passport like Yang advocates for. It would be much easier and less overbearing to just keep asking everyone to wear a mask until we've reached a certain percent of the population vaccinated. That can be region-specific as well. Since we weren't sure before about the means testing for the child allowance, I wanted to update on that. The old income threshold for the credit was $200,000 for individuals and $400,000 for families. The threshold for the new allowance is much lower, unfortunately, $75,000 and $150,000 respectively. However, those above that threshold basically just get the old tax credit instead of the new one, so no one is losing anything from this reform. Think of it as the new allowance being extra for those under the lower threshold, as well as now including those with incomes under $2,500, which the old tax credit excluded. So we're no longer excluding the poor in a failed attempt to force them into employment. Advance monthly payments are expected to begin around July. There was a terrible mass shooting in Atlanta of 8 people at 3 massage parlors, most of whom were Asian American women. While the killer claims it was not racially motivated and weirdly muddied the waters by claiming a connection to sex addiction, it's pretty clear both race and sex played some role in the motive. Yang put together a thread honoring the victims, so I would direct you there to learn more about them. It's just the latest in a string of crimes against Asian Americans since COVID and Trump drummed up hatred and bigotry against their community. Many unemployed residents of North Carolina are experiencing a new blow right now from their state government. Their state unemployment insurance benefits are being reduced. Pat Ryan, spokesman for Senate Republicans, said those people will qualify for the $300 benefit from the Democrats' relief bill and implied that should be enough because he thinks the crisis is basically over. We still have nearly 10 million formally unemployed and more still informally unemployed, and up to 60% of the businesses lost are never coming back. But they think it's all back to normal now? This is the level of delusion or disregard that leads to not supporting further stimulus bills and to a prolonged recession. And in North Carolina, it is leading to unemployed Americans having the floor ripped out from under them at a time when not even wage slavery is an option because there simply aren't enough jobs. Incredible. Anna Massaglia disclosed that Democrats benefited from dark money donations by almost 6 times as much as Republicans in the recent elections. It's a figure which makes it all the more curious that Democrats are the party expending political capital to erase that dark money from elections with H.R. 1, while Republican legislators oppose transparency, routinely arguing that revealing donors infringes on their right to free speech. It actually infringes on their right to secret bribery of government officials. Even if donations were speech, the right is for free speech, not secret speech. That just means we don't know who's pulling the strings in government. On the legislative front, Gomez and 72 other House Democrats have introduced a resolution to expel Marjorie Greene from Congress, citing her comments and acts that invoke violence against other congresspeople and her subscription to wild conspiracy theories, including liking a post about putting a bullet in Pelosi's brain and carrying a gun into Congress. It's a fight over the standards that should be set for elected officials, but ultimately amounts to a protest statement, as there is no chance Democrats can get the two-thirds majority required to expel Greene. House Dems have also introduced the Puerto Rico Self-Determination Act, which would basically have Puerto Ricans vote on whether they want statehood or independence or neither, and bind Congress to enact whatever solution the public chooses. Puerto Rico, as a territory or colony of the U.S., currently cannot vote in the presidential election, among other disenfranchisements. This bill is in some conflict with another, which is strictly for statehood. Puerto Ricans have previously voted in favor of statehood, but by a very slim margin. A bill for DC statehood is also gathering co-sponsors for imminent introduction. DC residents pay federal taxes but do not have representation in Congress. It is blatantly hypocritical, as our nation was literally founded on that exact issue. We didn't want to be treated as colonies, and neither does DC. It is imperative that we as a democratic nation allow all citizens to fully participate in democracy. But there is no question that the GOP will block statehood for DC. It is perhaps, next to their actions in the most recent election cycle, the most glaring proof of the GOP's hostility toward democracy, and yet another burning reason to eliminate the filibuster. House Democrats also passed a bill establishing a pathway to citizenship for children smuggled across the border who have grown up in the U.S. While immigration was, up until recently, a bipartisan issue, the GOP has retreated into isolationist rhetoric over the past decade, making the bill unlikely to pass the Senate. The immigration space is also currently complicated by a recent surge in immigrants at the border of about 30%. Republican representatives, meanwhile, introduced a bill that would block all further immigration reform until more strict border security measures are passed. The final legislative piece is the reintroduction of the single-payer Medicare for All bill that has no chance of passing even the House, given its extreme nature of outlawing private insurance and being opposed by Biden, the GOP, most Democratic legislators, and the general public. It may, however, pressure Biden to introduce his own public option plan sooner, which does have broad support among the public and Democrats. No doubt it would still be opposed by GOP legislators simply because it will be coming from the Democrats. Thus, we return again to the filibuster. And on that note, another approach to dismantling the filibuster or crafting exceptions is being considered, which is returning it to its original status. There was no such thing as a filibuster for the first century of the United States' existence. It only arose as Congress removed a law which allowed a simple majority to end discussion and bring a bill to vote. Up until then, all legislation was passed with a simple majority. The change wasn't even intentional, it was thought of as superfluous at the time and only much later came to be used as a weapon of obstruction that it is today, crippling our democratic government. The proposal now is to reverse that change, reinstating the ability of a simple majority of senators to end objections to a bill after some amount of time, as well as requiring objectors to actually be present and speaking. This would preserve the ability of the minority to object and delay, but remove the ability to cripple the legislative process. The article in the links has a great interview digging into the details of this and other Senate realities, and there's also a link to a really good history of the filibuster. Yang recently voiced his support for removing the filibuster. Biden recently said he's on board for at least forcing obstructionists to be present and speaking the whole time, referred to as a speaking filibuster. But that only makes the process more uncomfortable. It does not prevent obstruction. We need to get through to Biden, Manchin, and Sinema on this badly. Congress must function. Democracy cannot afford gridlock, especially during these times of crisis. Moving on, we haven't talked about 32-hour work week in a while. Well, the Spanish government has accepted a proposal from the small left-wing party for a 3-year, 6,000 worker, €50 million trial that would allow companies to trial reduced hours with subsidies covering up to 100% of the costs the first year, 50% the second year, and 33% the third year. It is almost exactly what I have been waiting to see. Encourage companies to try it out by reducing the risk, maybe even incentivize it with a tax cut. It won't cost the government much, since studies show companies don't lose profit in this shift. We just need to get them over the ideological resistance. It's all that's keeping people from reclaiming a significant portion of their lives. Super happy to see this trial out of Spain, and I hope we can get something similar going here. The movement for recurring stimulus checks and UBI got some great news from a new poll by ALG Research, conducted in Arizona, California, Georgia, Nevada, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. It shows 71% support for raising taxes on the wealthy to fund additional stimulus checks, including a majority of Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, with just 19% opposed. Tax-funded may not be my preferred approach for a UBI, as it brings with it the ideological argument of redistribution, but support this high for exactly that shows just how strong the sentiment for an income floor has grown. Even if it means redistributing wealth, the vast majority of Americans are for unconditional checks from the federal government. This is very, very good news and reinvigorates my resolve to fight for emergency UBI. The people are with us, and we need to see to it that our representatives do the job of representing us. Our old friends Give Directly tweeted out probably the best response ever to the classic handout line of teaching to fish instead of giving a fish. They showcased a woman from their cash transfer trial who used her money to buy a boat so she could catch fish and created a thriving business as a result. It highlights the resource so often overlooked for becoming independent, startup capital. This will be my go-to response from now on for that tiresome talking point. Link below. Basic Income Quotes tweeted a great clip of Floyd Marinescu, CEO and founder of UBI Works, the Canadian UBI advocacy group. It's just a minute long, but gets at the heart of UBI, that the biggest value is simply financial security, which allows people to take risks, refuse exploitation, make investments, plan for the long term, and not have to worry about survival. And coming from a CEO certainly helps. Highly advise bookmarking this one. It'll be the one that gets through to certain people. Finally, Paterson, New Jersey's City Council is set to sign off on their guaranteed income trial with a vote next week. 110 Paterson families would get $400 a month for 1 year, funded by Jack Dorsey's donation to Mayors for AGI. Participants will be chosen by lottery, conducted by the Center for Guaranteed Income Research at the University of Pennsylvania's School of Social Policy and Practice. It would unfortunately be means-tested with a $30,000 limit for individuals and $88,000 for families, but otherwise unconditional. Another 44 individuals and families would be picked to be part of a control group. The university would collect data on how the money is spent and other metrics. Truly, we are living in the dawning age of UBI. Let's get that sun over the horizon. And that'll do it for today's Yang Daily. Bookmark and share the COVID reinfection study, the filibuster article in history, Spain's 32-hour workweek trial, the tax-funded stimulus poll, Give Directly's phishing example, the Marinescu clip, and the Paterson trial. Flood Congress with calls, tweets, faxes, and letters using the ResistBot or Income Movement Easy Contacts below. If you need help, consult Humanity Forward, the Income Movement Aid Database, the Mission Asset Fund, or United Way, and don't forget to Yang Daily.